Welcome to the Security Nexus. The Security Nexus is a Maryland-based national security consultancy. We specialize in strategic advisory, education, and public engagement. Through podcasts, blogs, training, and consulting, we provide insight into the evolving landscape of cyber threats, hybrid warfare, and strategic security policy. Our mission is to inform, educate, and empower both professionals and the public through clear, accessible, and actionable knowledge. For more analysis and resources, visit thesecuritynexus.net. All right, let's jump right into today's explainer. We're going to be looking at a really fascinating analysis drawn straight from recent defense reports, congressional testimonies, and security assessments regarding China's maritime strategy.
China's maritime intelligence network is often discussed as a collection of separate capabilities: spy ships, underwater sensors, autonomous vehicles, and commercial port investments. But what if those systems are actually parts of a single intelligence architecture designed to support a future conflict in the Western Pacific? That right there is the core thesis we're unpacking today. The source material strongly argues that China's maritime collection is a unified, layered system. We are not just looking at a bunch of isolated, one-off programs.
To really grasp this architecture, we're going to deconstruct it layer by layer. First, we'll look at the fleet above the water, then the architecture below the surface. After that, we'll tackle the cable problem, followed by the commercial layer, and finally, we'll bring it all together and examine the convergence problem.
So starting with Chapter 1, the fleet above the water, focusing on persistent SIGINT collection. This is absolutely the most visible layer of China's maritime intelligence enterprise. We're talking about the People's Liberation Army Navy, the Plan, and their Type 815 and 815G Auxiliary General Intelligence vessels. Now these are dedicated signals intelligence, or SIGINT platforms. They're decked out with these massive hull-mounted and above-deck antenna arrays. And what's really interesting is their operational pattern. It's incredibly deliberate. They consistently position themselves in international waters, right near multilateral allied naval exercises. They sit there, collect intelligence against allied systems from a sustained range, and then they transit home.
And make no mistake, they aren't just out there casually observing. They are systematically intercepting radar emissions, communications, and electronic warfare signatures from literally every allied platform participating in those exercises. This directly fulfills a massive core requirement that was actually laid out in China's 2019 National Defense White Paper, achieving what they call information dominance. By continuously scooping up all this data during peacetime, the PLA is building a highly comprehensive electronic order of battle. Think of it as a master map of exactly how allied communications and radars operate. They are actively creating pre-built targeting data. If a Taiwan contingency were to happen, having this vast pre-recorded signature library could literally be the difference between allied electronic warfare systems working effectively or being degraded right out of the gate.
So, the absolutely crucial takeaway for this first layer is this: the PLA is not collecting isolated intelligence snapshots. It is building long-term signature libraries of allied forces. Every single intercepted exercise is treated as a strategic investment in their future operational success.
Moving on to Chapter 2, the architecture below the surface, exploring the unseen sensor networks.
While that surface fleet is the highly visible tip of the spear, we really have to look down into the subsurface domain to get the full picture. The seabed itself is actually acting as a massive intelligence platform. The Plan has poured heavy investments into these overlapping networks in the South China Sea. Specifically, they have systems known as the Great Underwater Wall and the Blue Ocean Information Network. We're talking about fixed acoustic sensors, intelligent buoys, and these extensive seafloor hydrophone arrays. And their primary goal? To detect, classify, and track any submarine contacts transiting through the region.
When you look at that regional operating environment, the Department of Defense actually assessed back in 2022 that the PLN is massively improving its anti-submarine warfare capabilities through these exact systems. And it's not just the fixed sensors on the ocean floor either. The PLA is actively deploying autonomous underwater vehicles, or AUVs, including these intelligent underwater gliders to run surveying and reconnaissance missions. Now, the source reports do note some current technological hurdles with these AUVs, like battery constraints, but the strategic intent is crystal clear. They are actively working to extend the coverage of those fixed sensor networks and basically eliminate any detection latency. Simply put, they want to know exactly where allied submarines are before any hostilities ever even begin.
The takeaway here is pretty profound. The seabed is becoming an intelligence collection environment. It is no longer just a passive, empty domain. It's actively wired for persistent surveillance.
All right, Chapter 3, the cable problem, targeting digital infrastructure.
Let's look at how this builds into an infrastructural threat. Deep beneath the waves run the massive fiber optic cables that essentially power modern communications. The source reports highlight a very heavy concentration of these cables right north of Taiwan. They carry traffic that is absolutely essential to Taiwan's infrastructure, as well as massive trans-Pacific data exchanges, which actually includes internet access for parts of the United States. And here's where it gets alarming. The sources note that PLA AUVs have been explicitly designed to identify and access these undersea cables. Some units have even shown interest in vehicles equipped with robotic arms. The risk here is immense, right? In a conflict scenario, the capability to sever these lines or even tap them to intercept unencrypted traffic could severely degrade Allied command and control. Interestingly enough, the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission explicitly flagged that while China does rely on some of these very same cables for its own internet access, they are developing the capability to disrupt them anyway. They're clearly calculating that the asymmetric advantage in a conflict totally outweighs the mutual vulnerability.
So the stark reality we have to take away from this is, modern military power depends on digital infrastructure that runs across the ocean floor. And right now, that infrastructure is squarely in the crosshairs of this intelligence architecture.
Next up is Chapter 4, the commercial layer, looking at ports as intelligence platforms.
Now we're going to zoom out from military hardware and step into a global gray zone, 96. According to source testimonies, that is the exact number of foreign ports worldwide where Chinese state-owned enterprises currently own or operate terminals. Let that sink in for a second.
Firms like Costco and the China Merchants Group form a massive, sprawling global logistics backbone. But this isn't just about shipping cargo. This network generates a staggering volume of proprietary information. We're talking vessel movements, fuel consumption data, supply chain vulnerabilities, and even the maintenance cycles of foreign navies that use these facilities. Furthermore, this commercial footprint allows the planned surveillance ships to conduct regular port calls. They can refuel and rotate crews without ever having to return to China. In fact, over 1/3 of those 96 ports have hosted planned port calls. And this is not just some happy accident. The sources point out that China's 2020 Science of Military Strategy explicitly directs the military to leverage commercial infrastructure to generate intelligence information support for overseas operations. It's written right into their doctrine.
So the takeaway from this layer is basically hiding in plain sight. Commercial infrastructure can generate strategic intelligence. It aggregates into a maritime operating picture that easily rivals dedicated military surveillance.
And that brings us to Chapter 5, the convergence problem. The creation of an integrated maritime intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance architecture.
This is really where all the puzzle pieces click together into the core thesis of our explainer. These disparate layers completely compound each other. Think about it. The surface AGI ships gather the electronic order of battle. The subsurface sensor networks and gliders track the submarines. The AUVs target the structural vulnerabilities of the fiber optic cables. And those commercial port terminals map out the logistics and sustainment of Allied navies. If you analyze them individually, none of these are entirely unprecedented on their own. But what makes this uniquely formidable is the convergence. They operate under a unified doctrinal framework, actively building one highly integrated intelligence picture, geared toward a very specific scenario: detecting, degrading, and countering any Allied maritime intervention in a potential Taiwan contingency.
The source material argues that Western analysis has historically been kind of trapped in a single domain analytical frame. When you assess the threat layer by layer, totally in isolation, it produces fragmented, purely tactical responses. Things like simply hardening a cable or just monitoring one specific spy ship. But a cross-domain convergence assessment treats the integrated architecture itself as the true threat. Because in reality, degrading one layer in a conflict will require understanding exactly how it is supported by the data feeding in from all the others. It's a single massive web.
So to address this comprehensively, the sources outline some required shifts in Allied strategic planning. First, we have to move beyond mere incident response. Second, we need to rigorously assess these cross-domain interactions. Third, analysts need to identify the actual nodes and seams where these intelligence feeds merge, finding the actual vulnerabilities in their network. And finally, rebuilding Allied maritime intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance to operate in the collection environment China has already created today, not the environment that existed a decade ago.
Which really leaves us with a final provocative thought to consider. This infrastructure is persistent, it's layered, and it is operating continuously right now in peacetime. The eyes are already in the water. Will Western strategy treat this as a system problem before a Taiwan contingency makes it a full-blown crisis?
Thank you for joining me for this explainer. It's a complex, incredibly multifaceted issue, but breaking it down layer by layer shows us exactly how these strategic puzzle pieces fit together. Keep analyzing, keep asking questions, and keep learning.